The Skarnak tusk hound wasn't supposed to be loose, let alone bleeding, limping, and barreling down the main corridor of Zenthari port like a freight barge gone rogue. Cargo crates scattered like dice as the 2-meter-tall creature crashed through a vendor stall, snarling through cracked fangs, its front leg twisted at an angle that made several bystanders gag. Security bots stood down, programmed not to engage biologics, tagged as military asset. The alien vet on call took one look at the beast and immediately sealed the infirmary door behind him. "I'm not opening that," he barked through the intercom, panic flooding his voice. "That's a Skarnak border hound. Those things are trained to kill. You treat it if you want to die." No one moved. Except for the human. Ben Calder stepped forward, soft duffel slung over one shoulder, still wearing the standard-issue Navy jacket of the Interplanetary Interspecies Veterinary Exchange. He hadn't even unpacked yet. He took in the scene, shredded plating along the creature's side, blood streaking the floor, one eye milky with trauma. The tusk hound spun toward him, jaws open in a wheezing snarl. Ben slowly crouched, opened his bag, and pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves. Then, in a voice so calm it seemed absurd in the face of a raging bioengineered apex predator, he said, "Easy, buddy. Let's see what we're dealing with." The Skarnak froze mid-step. Its ears flicked once, then again. Blood dripped in heavy splats from its raised forelimb. The limb was grotesquely angled, dislocated, or fractured, maybe both, and the armored plates along its ribs were partially torn free, revealing torn myofiber bundles underneath. Bioengineered muscle, dense, layered, dangerous. The hallway had emptied of civilians. Only a handful of port staff remained, pressed against the walls or half hidden behind overturned trolleys. The vet doctor, Carex, if Ben remembered right, was still behind the glass wall of the med bay, his elongated Kurok's fingers curled over the emergency lockout panel. "You'll die," Carex called again, his voice cracking. "That thing isn't a patient, it's a live weapon." Ben didn't answer. He eased a little closer, close enough that the musky, metallic scent of the tusk hound's blood hit him full on. The creature's lips twitched, revealing those jagged canines again. Its whole body trembled, but not from rage. From shock? Ben recognized it, the glassy stare, the short, fast breathing, the spasming of muscle groups unrelated to locomotion. This wasn't berserker mode. This was crash physiology. The dog was trying not to collapse. "All right," he murmured, staying low. "We're in it now, huh?" With slow, open-handed movements, he slid a rolled towel from his bag and extended it. The dog growled but didn't move. Ben tossed the towel a meter to the side, letting it land near the animal's back paw. A test of tolerance. The hound flinched but didn't lunge. Its good eye tracked Ben. He kept speaking, not because the dog understood the words, but because voice mattered. Cadence, tone. Trust was behavior, and behavior was language. "Forelimbs bad. You've probably torn ligaments, maybe worse. Can't tell if it's broken without imaging, but we're not going to move you yet." He pulled gauze from his kit and looped it loosely around his own wrist before showing it, slowly, to the tusk hound. "Bandage, see? Nothing sharp. Just trying to stop the bleeding." The creature's breathing hitched, chest rising fast. Then, almost imperceptibly, it lowered its head. Not fully, not submission, just less resistance. Ben inched closer, reaching for the leg. The wound was nasty. The skin, if you could call it that, had torn open beneath the armor plate, and the tissue beneath was a nightmare of red and artificial black-pink muscle fibers. It smelled like copper and oil. Blood loss was significant. The leg wasn't just twisted, it was unstable. Likely a midshaft fracture of the radius and ulna equivalents. The joint capsule at the shoulder looked distended. Ben spoke again, quietly. "Okay, you're not walking on that. Gotta get it stable first." He reached back into his kit for his emergency splinting materials, compressed carbon mesh rods, and Velcro wraps designed for all kinds of limb shapes. But he had to work with what he could reach if he moved too fast. This thing could take his arm off. It didn't, not even when he touched the leg. The moment he laid his fingers near the brake, the tusk hound tensed but didn't strike. The creature's flanks heaved with the effort of restraint. Ben could feel the micro-vibrations in its musculature, the way pain rolled through it in waves. The break wasn't compound, thank God. No bone or synthetic analog protruded through the skin, but it was swollen and hot to the touch. "I'm going to lift the leg slightly. just enough to slide a support under. The hound's lips peeled back, but didn't close on him. Ben worked with methodical speed. He used the carbon rods to brace either side of the limb and secured the wraps with practiced efficiency. Once the limb was stabilized, the hound's breathing eased slightly. The worst pain had probably come from the unstable motion. Now, at least, it wasn't grinding against itself. That left the blood loss. He snapped open an IV kit, yes, Earth standard, but with species-adaptable ports, and slid the needle in behind the shoulder ridge. Fluids first. No sedative yet. He didn't want to depress circulation before stabilizing perfusion. He wrapped gauze around the exposed wound sites with pressure, checking the capillary refill on the gums. Slow, but not gone. It had time. Only after the splint and fluids were in place did he reach for the sedative. He tapped a dose into the injector, calculated by estimated weight at least 180 kilos, maybe more, and gave the hound a moment to sniff the tool before pressing it to the neck. It growled once. Then its head drooped. Its body eased down. Collapsed, but not unconscious. Just finally out of fight mode. Ben sat back on his heels, sweat slicking his back, and let out a slow breath. His pants were soaked with blood not his own, thankfully, but his hands shook slightly with the afterburn of adrenaline. Behind him, the glass door creaked open. Dr. Carrick's finally emerged, posture rigid, eyes locked on the now stabilized tusk hound. "You risked every life on this quadrant," he snapped, voice brittle. "That thing could have killed you with a flick of its paw." Ben stood, legs stiff, and peeled off his gloves. He wasn't angry, he said. He was terrified. Big difference. Terrified animals kill. Not if they trust you. Carrick's facial ridges flushed an irritated yellow, the Kurok's version of blanching. "You should have restrained it immediately. You didn't even sedate him before touching the limb. Sedating an unstable patient in hemorrhagic shock risks cardiac arrest. I stabilized him first, then sedated. That's how we do trauma triage on Earth." Carrick stared at him like he just announced Earth used prayer and goat entrails for diagnosis. Ben turned away, kneeling again beside the beast. "You've done the hard part," he murmured to the creature. "Now we get you somewhere safe." The transport gurney arrived 2 minutes later, escorted by 3 hesitant security drones and 1 brave junior medic, young, silvery-scaled, barely out of internship. She kept close to Ben, wide-eyed, following his every instruction. Together, they loaded the tusk hound onto the lift, now barely conscious, vitals slowly stabilizing. As they wheeled him toward the recovery wing, murmurs filled the corridor behind them. Some disbelief, some awe, and a question whispered in a dozen tongues across the port. Did the human actually touch it? Ben didn't hear them. He was already calculating blood volume replacement ratios and wondering if he'd need to request a 3D printed joint brace from Orbital. But somewhere, just under the clinical details, a quiet weight settled in his chest. This wasn't just a case. This one mattered. The tusk hound's breathing was shallow by the time they reached the secondary recovery unit. Not collapsed, not crashing, but shallow. Each exhale was wet with strain, as though his own ribcage was just another weight to bear. They'd sealed the corridor and cleared non-essential personnel. Even the heavy-limbed cargo loaders from Ganthus Prime had scuttled back into their stations, heads low, murmuring about weaponized animals and liability shields. Ben didn't care about the optics. Not yet. Not with the beast twitching on the gurney beside him, blood now clotting in patches along its side, its prosthetic-ready joint slicked with antiseptic gel. 0.9 saline, second liter. "Push it in slow, don't flood the line," he said to the junior medic, Relin, who hovered nearby with cautious determination. "Yes, Dr. Calder." "Ben's fine." Relin looked confused. "Is that another Earth credential?" He almost smiled. "It's just my name." She blinked, as if she wasn't entirely convinced. Then she glanced at the tusk hound again. "Will he live?" Ben turned toward the vitals, HR dropping but not dangerously, SpO2 climbing now that oxygen was flowing through the modified face mask, core temp low, still on the edge. "I'll let you know in the next 30 minutes. He worked silently then, setting lines, checking tissue perfusion through the torn plating, carefully shaving away melted armor that had fused with underlying tissue. The surgical shears hissed each time they sliced across a burnt edge. The hound didn't flinch, he was too far under, just small shudders from pain, memory, or nerves. Most of the plating damage was superficial, but the limb injury was worse than Ben had first assessed. Swelling had increased, and the knee joint capsule was distended enough to suggest internal bleeding. He used the handheld scanner Earth, modified, but programmed for multi-species skeletal markers, and watched as the image loaded. He winced. Yeah, he muttered, mostly to himself. Midshaft fracture, spiral, definitely displaced. Probably sheared during initial trauma, then worsened by running on it. He turned to Relin. Notify ortho. We'll need internal fixation, titanium rods, joint aligned, no weight bearing for at least 6 weeks, and see if the biofabrication lab has any Scarnac-compatible socket specs on file. She nodded quickly and disappeared down the hallway. Alone, Ben stared down at the hound again. 6 weeks, big guy, he said quietly, and that's just to get your leg to hold weight again. We're looking at months before you run. The beast didn't respond, obviously, but Ben had said it for himself, too, to set expectations. Healing didn't come quick just because the patient was big or genetically modified or called a military asset by half the quadrant. Healing obeyed biology, not marketing tags. He'd learned that the hard way. By the 3rd day, the hound's nameplate had been updated in the system from unclaimed bioasset to XK-17, Hold Ben Calder. Carex protested immediately. But the administrative override had come from Port Command itself. Why is your name listed on it? The Kurok surgeon demanded, gesturing at the wall display as though it had personally betrayed him. Because he's not property anymore, Ben replied. No handler, no owner, no tag from any known military firm. Port regs say that after 48 hours of unclaimed status, the responsible medical officer becomes temporary guardian. That's me. Carex's tone turned acid. And if he tears someone's head off while recovering? Then I take responsibility, Ben said, not flinching. Carex stared at him, then turned and stalked off. It wasn't the last conversation they'd have that week, but it was the most civil. XK-17, Ben still refused to call him that out loud, remained sedated for another 20 hours. Long enough to stabilize blood pressure, begin tissue regeneration protocols, and clear infection risk from the torn dermal membranes. But sedation couldn't last forever. Eventually, the hound would wake, and when he did, pain would come with him. Ben was already prepping for it. He sat beside the recovery enclosure, updating vitals, when the first low whine rattled from the tusk hound's throat, the kind of sound you'd mistake for an engine starting until the breathing changed. Ben rose immediately and keyed in a code. The tranquilizing agent faded from the IV line. The hound stirred. His tail thumped once, a low, weak twitch. Ben stayed in view, arms at his sides, tone calm. Hey there, you're back. The eyes opened slowly, both this time. The injured one was still cloudy, probably nerve trauma, but the gaze locked onto Ben's face and didn't shift. Try not to move. You'll feel your leg. It's splinted and fixed, but if you shift too fast, you'll tear it again. The hound's chest rose and fell. No snarl, no growl. Ben inched closer and crouched. Nod if you understand. The hound's ear flicked. Not a nod, exactly, but not a denial. It was something. He tapped a small console and initiated the drip for localized analgesia. Short bursts, species-specific. The hound shivered, then settled. Breathing normalized again. That was good. But now came the real work. Day 7. They attempted assisted standing. It was an ungraceful disaster. The hound tried to rise and immediately collapsed with a yelp that Ben felt in his own chest. He checked the leg again, no new swelling, no signs of ligament rupture, just overexertion. But the hound refused to make eye contact for hours afterward, curled away, tense and unmoving. Day 10. Ben introduced tactile desensitization therapy. Light touches to the prosthetic-compatible stump. Pressure stimuli. Treat-based reward system, once he figured out what the beast would even accept as a treat. Turns out, dehydrated protein slabs. Earth-sourced beef jerky, of all things. The reaction from the alien staff, when he opened the packet, was worth remembering. You're feeding that thing dried meat? Carex had said, appalled. Ben shrugged. Better than feeding him you. The bond grew slowly. It wasn't affection, not yet. But trust started to anchor in the space between. The tusk hound would let Ben enter the enclosure without snarling, would accept fluids directly by mouth instead of through the IV, would shift weight slightly when asked. A few times, when pain spasms overtook him, he growled low and stared through Ben like he might lunge, but he never did. Ben never flinched. He kept his movements smooth, voice even, contact respectful, no sudden gestures, no attempts at dominance, no treats offered when the hound was agitated. "You earned the calm," he told Relin during one of her sessions, "by respecting the storm." She took notes furiously, tail twitching. It wasn't until day 16 that the first visitors arrived. Not for the hound. For Ben. 3 figures, tall and plated in polished green exosuits, stepped into the medbay with diplomatic clearance markers flashing on their shoulders. Yasari hard-faced merchants and manufacturers of security beasts across 2 sectors. "We heard of the incident," their translator said. "You stabilized XK-17 without tranquilizers or shock cages?" "I stabilized a patient who was hemorrhaging and in pain," Ben said. "That's not a miracle. That's basic medicine." "Basic medicine does not usually result in live outcomes with Skarnak breeds," one of them replied flatly. "You used behavioral entrainment protocols?" Ben glanced through the glass. The hound was dozing now, one leg fitted with early-stage prosthetic molding, his head resting against the crate wall like a worn-down old dog. "No," Ben said. "I use trust." The Yasari exchanged unreadable glances. Then they left without another word. Carex appeared from around the corner not long after, arms crossed. "They came expecting to discredit you." Ben raised a brow. "And?" "They left confused. That's worse." He didn't sound angry anymore. Just unsettled. By week 3, the hound no longer responded to XK-17. Ben had started using a name, half-jokingly, but it stuck. Tanner. No idea why. It just felt right. Tanner would now rise slowly when Ben entered, limp toward him, and if no one was watching, nuzzle his thigh for a moment before lying back down. Still cautious, still damaged. But something had shifted. Not just in the dog, in the station, and in the people who were starting to watch. By the start of the 4th week, the clinic waiting area looked more like a diplomatic hall than a veterinary facility. The receptionist console had been relocated twice to accommodate unexpected delegations, first from the Yasari Commerce Syndicate, then the Dornak Collective, and then, most unnervingly, a Kravari Scout flotilla that sent 3 translation drones and no actual bodies. They simply hovered outside the observation glass for 4 hours, clicking in their odd, sonar-like pulses, watching Tanner eat a cube of nutrient gel off a stainless tray like it was an honor ritual. Ben had stopped asking questions by that point. The message was clear. Word had gotten out. Not just about the Tusk Hound, but about how he'd handled him. They weren't coming for business contracts. They weren't asking to buy Tanner. They were asking questions no one expected from cultures known more for conquest than care. "Is it true you didn't dominate it? You let it approach you? Why didn't you use pain suppression collars?" Ben had a standard answer by now. He delivered it often, calmly, sometimes 5 times in one day. He was in pain, scared, cornered. Dominance doesn't solve that. Listening does. Sometimes the aliens argued. Usually, they just fell quiet and watched through the glass wall as Tanner slept, tail twitching, or as Ben coaxed him through slow, careful steps in the reinforced rehab loop. The prosthetic was still a temporary model, but Tanner was bearing light weight on it now, guided by a specialized harness and Ben's quiet voice. Relin started bringing interns to observe the sessions. Other junior medics followed. Then a visiting Zenthari ambassador's assistant asked if she could sit in on one. By day 30, Ben was holding impromptu workshops twice a week. Carex called them chaotic sermon parades, but didn't interfere. Not anymore. There was one moment that changed everything. A Dornak handler, tall, spined, with fractal tattoos tracing, each forearm brought a juvenile wreck bird in for treatment. The bird was thrashing inside a sonic box, its wing clearly dislocated, one eye dark with fear. Ben didn't take the case at first. He stayed back, watching as Carex moved forward. The Curux surgeon approached with his usual brisk confidence, scanning the creature and prepping a restraint field. Then the bird let out a screech, not just pain, but raw panic, and slammed itself into the wall of the box, blood splattering against the interior pane. Ben stepped in. "Wait." Carex turned, clearly annoyed. "It's dangerous. She's panicking. I've done dozens of these. She's not responding to your frequency." Carrick's eyes narrowed. You want to try your Earth Trust again? Ben didn't answer. He just opened the top panel of the box slowly and reached inside bare-handed, deliberately unguarded. The room held its breath. The wreck bird went still. Ben didn't touch it. He just let his hand hover a few centimeters away, fingers extended, wrist soft. After several seconds, the bird shifted, slightly, and lowered its head. Ben lifted it gently and cradled it against his chest. No restraints, he said, just gauze, dislocation wrap, and something sweet afterward. Relin gasped quietly. Carrick didn't say a word. Later that evening, Carrick stopped Ben in the corridor. No bluster, no lectures. Just a quiet, tired expression. That was impressive. Ben folded his arms. You think I was showing off? No, Carrick said. I think I've been doing this wrong for 20 years. That stopped him cold. The Kuroks folded his hands behind his back. You made me look at pain as more than just a symptom. That's uncomfortable. It's not comfortable for the ones feeling it either, Ben said softly. Carrick gave a slow nod. I don't like your methods. I don't need you to. But they work. They work because we pay attention. Another nod. Then Carrick added, almost reluctantly, You'll need to present this formally. The Sector Veterinary Assembly meets in 4 cycles. They'll want proof. I've got proof, Ben said, glancing toward the med wing. Tanner was standing, eating from a high tray, tail swaying lazily. Carrick followed his gaze. Yes, you do. Tanner's recovery wasn't smooth. He had setbacks. One day, he refused to stand. Another day, he tried to rip the prosthetic off with his teeth and needed emergency pain calibration. But each time, Ben sat with him. No scolding. No pressure. Just presence. And something strange began to happen. Tanner started guarding the clinic, not just resting in the corner or following Ben with his eyes. He began physically positioning himself near the entrance, watching who came in, growling softly at raised voices, stepping between children and sharp equipment. Once, when a Seer-class diplomat tried to bring in a hovering drone for private diagnostics, Tanner blocked its path until Ben gave the nod. He's developed a sentry pattern, Relin observed, scribbling notes, but with contextual boundaries. That's unusual. It's trust, Ben said, and responsibility. He's not a weapon anymore. By week 5, the training requests became formal. The first came from the Zenthari Cultural Exchange Board, an official dispatch requesting 3 observers to shadow Ben's team. Then came the Cravery emissaries, who asked for protocol documentation in 6 languages. And finally, a delegation from the Yal sector arrived, not with contracts, but with a recorded message. We have trained animals to obey. We have never trained ourselves to understand. Teach us. Ben forwarded the message to Earth. He got one reply from his old trauma instructor in San Diego. Told you, soft hands weren't weakness. You made history, Calder. The final turning point came without ceremony. Ben was adjusting Tanner's shoulder harness for a rehab walk when the beast paused mid-step and looked toward the entrance. A child, a Zenthari boy, maybe 4 years old, stood uncertainly near the door, holding a sickly, wheezing pet that looked like a furless otter with antennae. His mother tried to pull him back, clearly afraid of Tanner. But the boy didn't move. He just stared. And Tanner wagged his tail. Once, Ben knelt. He's okay. You can come in. The boy stepped forward cautiously, holding out the whimpering creature. Tanner sniffed the air, gave a soft chuff, and sat back on his haunches. The child smiled. Later that night, Ben sat outside the recovery unit. Carrick joined him. He guards your clinic now, the Kurok said. He guards what matters. You think he'll leave with you when your assignment ends? Ben didn't answer right away. Then he said, I don't think he wants to. Carrick gave a slow, measured look. Then maybe he's found something better than a border to patrol. Ben glanced at the old scars under the plating, the newly healed leg, the steady breath of a creature who had once come in as a weapon and now rested as something far more complex. I think we both have, he said. The day before Ben Calder's rotation was scheduled to end, a formal delegation arrived from the Interplanetary Interspecies Veterinary Exchange. 5 members in tailored gray uniforms, each bearing the 3-ring sigil of the Earth Charter Coalition. They came with clipboards, optical translators, and the unmistakable air of people who didn't want surprises. Ben had just finished Tanner's morning walk 15 minutes, full weight bearing, a slight limp but no instability, and was kneeling beside him adjusting the harness. He didn't look up as the delegation entered the observation suite. "Dr. Calder?" the team lead asked, though he clearly knew. Ben gave a short nod and clipped the side strap into place. "Your assignment ends tomorrow. Per protocol, we're here to conduct a summary review of your service, outcomes, and facility condition. We've also been asked by Sector Liaison Carex to observe what he refers to as the practical demonstration." Ben finally stood, brushing his hands on his scrubs. "You mean Tanner?" The lead glanced down at the Tusk Hound, who stared back with unblinking calm. The Tusk Hound. Yes. He has a name. That earned a brief pause from the delegate. Noted. Tanner sat obediently at Ben's side. His prosthetic leg was now polished composite, painted to match his natural armor plating. A small earth blue emblem had been etched along the socket, a subtle mark of the vet program. He didn't growl. He didn't pace. He simply waited. "He's not sedated?" one of the other delegates asked. "No," Ben said. "He's awake, cooperative. He's been off sedatives for nearly a month." Another muttered, "That's either genius or insanity." Ben ignored it. He looked down and gave a subtle signal open palm, fingers bent slightly, and Tanner rose. No hesitation. The harness tugged slightly as he turned, walked 3 paces, then sat on command. No one spoke. Ben crouched again and removed the harness entirely. Tanner didn't move. "This is a Skarnak border hound," Ben said, directing his words toward the delegates now. "When he arrived, he was bleeding, panicked, and untreated. Your own logs classify these creatures as military-grade biologics, aggressive, territorial, and nearly impossible to handle without neural restraints." He looked up, meeting their eyes. "And he's been living in a clinic full of fragile equipment, nervous staff, and sick animals for over a month. Not a single incident." "Your report mentioned non-coercive conditioning methods," one of them said, already typing. "Not conditioning, cooperation. You're implying emotional intelligence." "I'm not implying anything. I'm telling you that when we treat animals like they can only be controlled through fear, we make them more dangerous." He walked Tanner across the room, then stopped beside a visiting Skarelian diplomat's child, tiny, feathered, barely tall enough to reach Tanner's shoulder. The boy reached out, hesitant. Tanner lowered his head, gently, and pressed his snout into the child's open palm. The room fell into a stillness so complete that the only sound was the quiet whir of the air filtration system. Then the delegate nodded once and said, simply, "We've seen enough." Ben spent the evening packing. Not much, honestly. His quarters were barely more than a bunk and a few shelves. Relin stopped by with a box of treats, mostly sweets she claimed were probably safe for humans. "Hard to believe you're actually going," she said, her tone halfway between admiration and disappointment. 6-month rotation, Ben replied. "That's what I signed up for." "You could request an extension. I mean, if you wanted to." He paused halfway through folding a shirt. "Wouldn't feel right. I came to show what Earth does differently. We've done that. The clinic's changed." Relin glanced toward the hallway, where Tanner lay curled near the entrance of the med bay, one eye barely open, keeping silent vigil. "Not just the clinic," she said. He didn't answer. The next morning, departure clearance came through at 0900. The docking platform was crowded, not with dignitaries or brass, but with port workers, a few med students, and several of the aliens who'd once backed away when Tanner entered the room. Carex stood stiffly at the edge, arms crossed. He nodded once as Ben approached. "You've reset my entire professional standard," the Kurak said. "That's infuriating." Ben gave a dry chuckle. "You're welcome. I've sent in a request to Earth for collaborative curriculum materials, behavioral trust protocols, stress diffusion techniques, your observational assessment checklist. You'd better hope your species doesn't have copyright laws." Ben raised a brow. "You're actually using my checklists?" Carex didn't answer. He just turned slightly, gesturing down the hallway. Tanner was there. Unleashed, unrestrained, not escorted. Just walking. He moved slowly, with measured purpose, shoulder to hip with the kind of balance that no prosthetic should have been able to achieve this soon. Ben felt a lump rise in his throat. Tanner reached him, then stopped. Looked up. "I can't take you with me," Ben whispered. "You know that, right?" Tanner didn't respond, obviously, But something about his stillness, his alert calm, felt like understanding. "You're not a patient anymore," Ben said softly. "You're part of this place now." A pause. Then Ben crouched and rested a hand just behind Tanner's jaw, where the plating gave way to the soft skin beneath. "You came in broken," he said. "They thought you were just a weapon. But you're more. You've always been more." Tanner leaned into the contact, just briefly. Then he turned. He walked back to the clinic on his own. Head high, tail low, no limp. The crowd watched in reverent silence. The shuttle launch was quiet. Ben sat by the window, watching the docking ring rotate away behind him, and let the silence settle. His datapad pinged once. A message from Relin. Just a short vid. Tanner curled up beside the medbay entrance, an old blanket tucked near his side. A patient, barely visible behind a divider, reached out to pet his paw. Tanner didn't move. But he didn't pull away, either. Below the vid was a message. "He still listens for your voice." Ben stared at the screen for a long time. Then he typed one reply. He doesn't need it anymore. He knows how to trust now. In the years that followed, Ben's name showed up in places he never expected. Curriculums, sector symposiums, a footnote in a Skarnak decommissioning protocol revision. But the title that stuck wasn't one he gave himself. It started as a joke, some alien mechanic referencing the one who whispered to the beast. Then it became something else. A quiet phrase passed between medics and handlers and trainers across 3 systems. They didn't call him the human vet anymore. They just called him the one who listened.